Okay, we're recording. Yeah, it says, yeah, okay, stop recording. And I hit start recording. Okay, so we're recording. All right, hey everyone who watches these Bible videos. This is Brian Lee Davidson Tarka, but if you're Japanese, you could call me Masaru, maybe, or you could call me Brian, or maybe you have another name for me. Tell me if you have other names for me. I want to know those. Uh, but today, we're moving on to the second chapter of the book of John. And we're looking at what some people have called Jesus' first miracle. I'm going to disagree with it. Now, this may take a little bit of time to go over the intricacies of what we have here because a lot of things have been said about this chapter. There's a lot of misinterpretations, particularly cultural misinterpretations of what's going on, and I'd like to address those as I go through it. But yeah, let's take a look at this. Starting at verse 1 of chapter 2 in the book of John, we're going to look at Jesus going to a wedding festival. Okay, a wedding feast. This is where Jesus is. And he invites his disciples along. He's been collecting disciples. And that's actually part of what I'm going to get into a little bit. Actually, before I even start reading, I'm going to talk a little bit about what number miracle this was and why I don't think we could call it Jesus' first miracle. Well, first of all, we're all familiar with the first miracle that we have with Jesus Christ, and some people would probably argue that it's not him performing the miracle, but I would say that when you have a being such as the Trinity involved, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, where the Father is involved, where the Spirit is involved, Jesus is involved. So they're involved as a triune God. So I would argue that one of the first miracles that we see from Jesus as the Son, unless you're looking at certain manifestations in the Old Testament that could be called Christophanies, I would say that his birth is his first miracle. I think that feels like it should be obvious. I'm going to go with that according to what we have in New Testament ministry, his manifestation is his first miracle. Now, that being said, what's the second? What happened between this wedding feast where, spoiler, he turns water into wine. Spoiler. But what happened between the wedding feast and his birth that is miraculous? Well, there was the time he was a child, and this may not be so miraculous. In fact, I won't call this a miracle. He was sharing his wisdom with people at the temple, and people were like, oh my gosh, how can a kid talk to us like this? And, that was different. I don't know if I would call that miraculous. It's not something that led people to declare him the Messiah. However, we do have an event where that did happen, and that's with his disciple Nathaniel. I believe that might have been in the last video. Yeah, the last video I talked about him calling Philip and Nathaniel to follow him. Nathaniel was not sure that this was the Messiah, but then Jesus said that he knew that he was underneath a tree. I think it was a fig tree. I saw you while you were under the fig tree before Philip called you. So he was hanging out at this fig tree before Philip called. Maybe he was resting, but apparently he was alone enough that he felt nobody else could have known that he was there. So it doesn't seem like a very, very heavy miracle. It's not transforming one substance into another substance. But this is a time before social media. This is a time before cameras. You could say, oh, well, Jesus, was just walking by. He happened to see him. I'm going to go with this is this is astounding enough that it must have been astounding because Nathaniel was stunned, was so amazed. He said, "This must be the Messiah." So, whatever these circumstances were, they were apparently miraculous enough that this should probably be considered a second miracle. Now, we're going to go into what I'm going to say is maybe the third miracle that we see Christ performing, where he's at a wedding feast and he turns water into strong wine. Let's begin with that sizable introduction, I guess, but I think it's good to kind of lay things out because we hear some things and sometimes it's good to stop and think through just some of the little details we hear. So let's continue, or let's start with chapter 2, verse 1. Jesus changes water into wine, and we're going to go on to verse 11. On that day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." Now, Jesus is omniscient. I think he knows what's going on in his mother's head. "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come." Now, that being said, there may be other miracles that have happened that aren't necessarily recorded in the Bible. You know, Mary being the mother of the Son of God, maybe she was aware of certain things. You know, and maybe this is one of those times where it's like, okay, you know, my son is the Messiah. Maybe I should nudge him to do some Messiah-ing things. You know, so I think this is kind of a casual nudge. And Jesus is saying, my time has not yet come. You know, so maybe this is part of the casualness that I keep coming back to. You know, they're having this discussion where Mary is kind of nudging her son to do something because she knows that he can solve this somehow. His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Okay, that's interesting. That's do whatever he tells you. So that feels to me like Mary knows something. You know, it's like, okay, I know that my son can solve what's going on here. So apparently this was an important enough event that she would go to him to solve such matters. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind that are used by Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Okay, so these are big jars. Big jars used for ceremonial washing. We're cleaning ourselves with the water in these jars. This is not just water, it's dirty water. So we have this dirty water that, you know, people would probably they wouldn't put much value in dirty water. You know, this is but it's an event. You want to be clean for the event, so you have these big jars of water on hand that people are washing themselves in. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars up with water." Okay, so filling the jars up with water sounds like it's fresh water right there. They filled them up to the brim. He told them, "Now draw some out and take it to your master, to the master of the banquet." Okay, so they drew some out of these giant jars that people were washing themselves in. I don't know if they just refilled the jar. Did they refill the jars, or He said fill the jars, not refill the jars. So the dirty water could have still been in there. But he's like, okay, fill it all the way up. So they filled it up to the brim, like he said. And then it's, okay, now take this to the master of the banquet. So they did. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from. He didn't know that it came from the washing jars, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom and said, Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine, after the guest had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. Okay, so what does this say? This was strong booze. Jesus made strong booze out of dirty water. And the master of the banquet, he would have wanted the strongest, best booze served first, because that gets people a little bit, woo, let's party, sort of thing. In Romania, it's very, very common to hear people say, even if they're not actually going to get drunk, I've had my wife and several friends who are Romanian say to me, "We're going to get drunk," and they don't mean they're going to get drunk. Some might, but a lot of them don't actually mean that they're going to get drunk. A lot of them mean simply, we're going to party. We're going to celebrate, and now in this case, they wanted people to get a little bit wobbly first, and then they could serve the cheaper wine, because who cares? You're already drunk because you had the hard stuff first. You're partying, being silly because of that harder wine. And now it's not so bad if you're just drinking the cheaper wine later. So that's something that's very important. There are some of my very, very sweet brothers and sisters that like to say, well, no. Jesus only made grape juice. No. That's not what's happening. That's really, really not what's happening here. The majority of people who are really studying this passage are not going to believe that in a time that lacked refrigeration, they're making some tame grape juice, and the people valued grape juice over wine. That's not the deal. Okay, let's continue. This is the first. Let's see, and this would be why they and this is why they say it's the first. And still, I guess this is like they're talking about the miraculous signs. It says this is the first of his miraculous signs. Maybe not his first miracle, but the first of one of his miraculous signs that Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee. He thus received his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. So they were following him. His disciples were following him out of belief, but like a stronger faith, it seems like their faith got stronger with this miracle right here. And that's why they're considering it a miraculous sign. So I hear some people say his first miracle, but that doesn't look like it's the case. It doesn't look like it's the first miracle, but the first one that was done by a sign, because you had that one personal one for Nathanael that made Nathanael think, it's like, oh yeah, this has to be the guy. You had John announcing his way, where you had this triune baptism in the Holy Spirit that John the Baptist provided the physical aspect of. and you had his birth, which would be the first miracle. But for an actual adult, his adulthood signs of ministry, he performed this in public. So that's probably the key difference right there. A miraculous sign versus miracles. This was done in public. The annual was private knowledge. The birth was something that people came to see. This is the Messiah that is born, the King of Kings. The Magi, the wise men, they came to see it. The shepherds, they came to see it. So there were witnesses to this event before they went off to Egypt for safety reasons. Jesus and Joseph and Mary being refugees. God was a refugee. They escaped to Egypt for safety reasons, just like many refugees from all over the world go to some other place to find safety. Could be across land borders or oceans. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to call all of those refugees. But yeah, we have his birth as a sign, but this would be a miraculous sign that kicks off his ministry. Not his first miracle. Because I keep hearing this was his first miracle, and that doesn't seem to be the case. In fact, he may have done private miracles just growing up in the household with Joseph and Mary. Maybe private miracles happened. Because in Mary's mind, she was like, okay, my son's the Messiah. You could do something to save this event. And it's an event. Think about that. It's a celebration. He's doing a miracle in a wedding feast, a wedding celebration. We see weddings as a strong metaphor for the gospel. And I really think this continues to emphasize the casualness that many times we have lost. And this is actually one of the reasons why I'm jotting down notes in regards to a book that right now I'm calling Casual Christ. So, no, actually, I think Christ Casual is better. Christ Casual, because that makes it more of an adjective, something that we can strive for, that we want to have that Christ casualness, because we see this is how he's meeting his disciples. This is how he's meeting the world. He's meeting the world casually. He's not some curmudgeon-y old priest or curmudgeon-y young priest, frankly. He's not like trying to smack people around institutionally with some sort of institutional emphasis. He is meeting people face to face in a way that I imagine God was hanging around the Garden of Eden when he was meeting with Adam and Eve. I think we're having an extension of God's character in the flesh with these events. And if we ignore Christ's emotions, if we ignore Christ's, attitude of being relaxed, later as I go through all the Gospels, my plan is to go through all the Gospels. I'm just starting with John because it's one of the ones that's quite a bit different from the other ones. As we go through the Gospels, we're going to see a lot of events, and I think we need to keep in mind that aspect of Christ's character that is casual, that is relaxed. That allows us to put this idea of an unaccepting Christ, even more further away from us. Because Christ is really accepting. He really is welcoming, and we're seeing this. We're not seeing a God who's shaking his finger at us saying, you. you know what you did. He's saying, in fact, later we'll see when he talks to a Samaritan woman, he does say, I know what you did. But he's welcoming. We see a lot of welcoming attitudes with Christ. And we'll see some times where we see Christ dealing with people very, very strongly. We'll see Christ correcting people. We'll see Christ picking up a whip in a temple marketplace. We'll see some strong things from Christ, but this aspect of Christ's casualness, it's been ignored for too long. And I don't know if I haven't seen a book specifically about the casualness of Christ, but that's one of the reasons why I'm approaching this project. I've always wanted to write a book, and if there's a book that my son can read in the future, I'd like him to read that. I'd like my son to see, oh, Jesus was really, really welcoming. And I want to reflect that. If I started a church, I would want it to be a welcoming church. I wouldn't want it to be one of these places where, it's like, sit down, I talk at you, stand up, hallelujah, and good day. I wouldn't want to do that. I'd want to do it differently. I'd want to do something where people could interrupt my sermon and talk to me. I would want to make a fellowship focused church. That's like a dream I have in the back of my head. I have in the back of my head the idea of planting a church somewhere that really, really meets people. And there's a talk, there's a Bible study where we're getting together and we're talking about the Bible, but there's ways that maybe we could be interrupted in the middle of our talk where somebody has a question, or maybe a time set aside for questions while maybe more than one speaker is actually talking and having a conversation about this subject. Maybe that could get the elders more involved. Maybe that could get the deacons more involved. Maybe it could get the so-called lay people of the church. I don't like the distinction between priestly Christians and lay Christians. I don't like that. I think that when Paul was planning churches in the New Testament, I think that he was very good at encouraging people together to utilize their gifts. And I feel that institutionally we've been very good at educating, getting a lot of the head knowledge together, but I don't know if for a couple thousand years we've been that great at keeping the social aspect. I think we're reuniting with that. I think what a lot of Protestant churches are doing by making small groups, I think that bridges the gap a little bit. Kind of makes up for a bit of loss that we've had going on. But yeah, I don't know if we're doing enough. It seems like we have centuries of loss in regards to Jesus's casualness. I think that there are many periods in Christian history where if you talked about Christ being casual, people would be insulted. People might set you on fire. People might be, if people heard how I'm talking now, it's quite possible, you say this around the wrong priest, you could have gotten hanged or any number of things, because it's like how dare you approach the how dare you be so dismissive of the idea of a priestly class versus a lay class. And how can I? It's because of this. This is how I can. This book is why I can call that into question. And it's also this day and age where I don't have to worry about um people coming after me for speaking freely in regards to the Bible. So God bless this day and age where I can do this, and where I can talk about Christ casualness. And probably the worst that can happen in that regards is somebody could be upset at this video that you're watching on YouTube. I might get some comments down here that are saying, "How could you say that Jesus is casual?" It's like, well, it's what I'm seeing in the Bible. That's how. But yeah, that's much better than someone colorfully disagreeing with me is much better than somebody killing me. And that's it's a good change. I think let's try to keep promoting civility and casualness that Christ would have wanted. I think that's where Christ wants us to go. So let's keep doing that. So God bless you. Uh, you know, uh, Enjoy your drink if you're going to a celebration. Uh, Drink responsibly because that's the best thing to do. We'll see later that Jesus was accused of being both a glutton and a drunkard. And yeah, we'll talk about that when we come to we'll talk about those things when we come to those parts. But yeah, be relaxed, celebrate, and enjoy the gospel. You know, Jesus continues his transparent, casual ministry, and I think that's an example for all of us Christians. Let's stay transparent, let's stay casual. God bless you guys. Enjoy your wine, if you drink wine. I click stop.